Namaste and good morning. We are in the process of studying in detail the spread of Indian classical dance outside India. And in this context, today we shall discuss about the reach of Indian classical dance in United Kingdom, that is UK. Until very recently, South Asian dance was a term unknown to either practitioners or audiences in the United Kingdom. South Asian dance was known as Indian or Asian dance, neither of which was technically correct. Asian was too vague, Indian was too specific, and left out the dance forms of other countries that formed South Asia. On the other hand, South Asia refers to the whole subcontinent regardless of political boundaries. It includes India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Singapore, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, countries where different forms of Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Odissi, Kathakali are practiced. Hence, South Asian dance has become the accepted term to indicate dance traditions of the subcontinent, especially India. In the case of most colonized countries in the tropical belt, the developing countries, that is the developing countries, their traditional art and craft forms were often dismissively labeled as ethnic, exotic by their colonizers, the developed countries, and not befitting the classical description. The same fate was suffered by Indian classical dances in the UK, even though dancers such as Uday Shankar, Ram Gopal, Shanta Rao, Krishnan Kutty and Mrinalini Sarabhai had performed to accolades and widespread appreciation in Britain between 1920 and 1965. It was the Asian Music Circles, that is a local organization, promoting and interpreting Indian culture to the non-Indian society, and it was their efforts at getting dancer couples as teachers to the UK, such as U.S. Krishna Rao and his wife Chandrabhaga Devi, that saw the first organized and long-lasting series on Indian classical dance in the UK in 1966. A few years later, the explosion of Indian communities from East African countries such as Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania saw a vast influx of Indian passport holding Indian Asian communities take refuge in the UK. Now, there was a huge community in the habit of cultural consumption and audience. Almost overnight, the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, also called the Institute of Indian Culture, grew by leaps and bounds. From a small office in 1972 to 77, when it opened a huge West London cultural centre offering a platform for performances. Simultaneously, a challenge in perception was taking place in the British white society. The 1970s witnessed a series of public debates on the place and nature of the arts. Young practitioners, especially a huge student population, challenged the old and set assumptions that cited the arts in conventional art houses, galleries and dance studios. New performance work made its way defiantly onto the streets, into non-art venues such as pubs, schools, garages, warehouses. Community arts workers and supporters based themselves on council estates and in working class communities seeking to engage the inhabitants to release the creativity they passionately believed was part of every single living human being. The story of the immigrant, of the culture that was a treasured part of personal identity, was for the first time seen not as an exotic but as a valid device for personal expression and survival. In 1976, a report on the state of ethnic arts titled "The Arts Britain Ignores," prepared by the Arts Council, came as a significant supporter of Indian classical dance in its struggle to move away from the marginalized exotic to the world of professional arts. This incisive report was prepared by Naseem Khan, who was trained in Bharatanatyam under the Rao couple at the Asian Music Circle and was later the co-director of the Academy of Indian Dance and chair of Aditi. Having established their credentials for authenticity, purity and classicism with those who believed only in Western classical ballet traditions, the Indian dancers in the United Kingdom, however, slowly moved away from the desire to restate the longevity of the classical Indian dance, as was the case with the dancers in the post-independence Indian decade of the 40s, 50s and 60s. To confront the challenge that Indian classical dance was faced with in the United Kingdom, it needed to enter into a dialogue with the local structures and voices in the UK. By turn of the century, some of the changes that took place were so radical and so rapid that some people were no longer able to recognize South Asian dance forms in the way these are practiced and presented. There continues to be a surge of dance activity aimed at expanding and merging forms, rejecting traditional content and seeking to be more attuned to the contemporary life, while articulating the specificity of being British and working in Britain. And yet, in the background, there is also a call to adhere to the traditional values, to preserve the authenticity of the traditions, and most of all, to resist facile dilution. Young British South Asian dancers of today insist that expansion and innovation must come from within their traditional practice and are generally unwilling to compromise their artistic integrity. These young dancers are almost always better trained than their senior counterparts because of the numerous dance schools that have sprung up in the 90s. But the problems they face are also very different from what their seniors had to deal with. The expectations of the British audience have changed. There is a demand for quality and high standards which was not there before. One of the issues not yet addressed in Britain is the existence of different pockets of South Asian artists somewhat disconnected and not quite interacting, as well as other artists from other Asian regions other than South Asia, Afro-Caribbeans and so on. They rarely come together in a genuine effort to communicate and explore each other's forms without the mediation of the white man's culture. Multiculturalism in Britain has very much to do with the white male European culture vis-a-vis other cultures, which have no time for each other and are engaged in a dialogue only with the white establishment. For instance, the India-based Bharatanatyam dancer Mallika Sarabhai has worked with Peter Badajo, whose dance vocabulary draws from the richness and complexities of African forms. Dr. Padma Subramaniam is another India-based dancer who choreographed a Bharatanatyam piece to traditional Japanese koto music. She even composed a piece for gamelan played in Singapore in 1992. This kind of exploration has not had any impact in Britain as yet. There is still a degree of insecurity and uncertainty within the South Asian dance community and all other non-white communities for that matter. Almost a fear of losing identity if they were to interact artistically with one another without the Western culture as the reference point. The sole exception as of now is Pratap and Priya Pawar. Pawar, who trained as Kathak Kendra, was sent with his Odissi dancer wife Priya as cultural ambassador to the West. They went first to Guyana, where they began to understand and work with local practice of dance. So, although their technique both in the West Indies and later in Britain held to its traditional line and direction, the performance work they produced began to explore overlaps, echoes and sharing. For example, they set Kathak beside flamenco and Caribbean dance, demonstrating that rhythmical and percussive patterns were important to all of them. There are many dancers and dance schools in the Great Britain. In addition to the Asian Music Circle and Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, one of the early organizations to start dance classes and performances was Navakala. It claims to be Britain's oldest Indian cultural association, and its energy lay in the East African immigrants, mostly Gujarati Indians. However, these three organizations were not associated with any particular dancer or choreographer. The first known dance school with dancer as its head was the Academy of Indian Dance, founded in 1979 by Tara Rajkumar, a Mohiniyattam dancer trained in India. Her academy aimed to see a fully validated syllabus for a dance degree course in Britain. In 1983, she took a bold step forward when she commissioned a dance drama that ensured a religious or classically based theme. Choreographed by the Dhananjayans, the dancer couple from India, it presented an adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. The performance, named The Adventures of Mowgli, featured dancers whose work was taken them to different directions later. Shobana Jayasinghe as the Bagheera the panther, Pushkala Gopal as Balu the deer, Unnikrishnan as Mowgli and Pratap Pawar as particularly the splendid tiger Shere Khan. It created a form that could contain and sustain different classical styles such as Bharatanatyam, Odissi and Kathak. It also tried to address the knotty problem of presentation of dance drama with the inherent challenges of dramatic shaping, a narrative voice, expressive choreography and ability to hold an overall rasa or mood. The work broke new ground by attracting uninitiated new audiences, reassured by an apparently familiar story. But its arrival on mainstream stages also made the contrast between the Indian dancers and the Western dancers extremely apparent. As compared to the professional Western dancers, the Indian dancers struggled to hold their own as professionals, drawing their strength from their Indian training rather than from the infrastructure, resources and support available to the Western dancers. Shobana Jayasinghe's experiments with Bharatanatyam began in mid-1980s in a cautious and very careful way, first placing it in unison with the work of Jayachandran, an Indian dancer trained in Western contemporary dance. Having established the Shobana Jayasinghe Dance Company, she steadily expanded her range and scope, delving to increasing depth, using commissioned music by contemporary Western composers like Michel Niam to help reconstruct an elaborate and ordered vocabulary of Bharatanatyam. As a choreographer, therefore, her work is often labeled as East-West collaboration, something she does not agree with, because this hides the fact that she and the British composers actually share a common British culture. One of her early productions was Making of Maps in 1992, in which she challenged the idea of home ground. As a child and young girl, Shobna lived in 4 different countries, and the only connecting factor was the fact that she was always a city dweller and felt at home in that particular pacing of life. The score for Making of Maps was therefore made up of sounds of a city, the hum of conversation, traffic, railway station, and domestic sounds. This was composed by Alistair MacDonald from Birmingham. Woven into the composition were fragments of Carnatic music, ensemble rehearsing, an ensemble put together by Ramamani, who lives in Bangalore, India. The music that Ramamani composed for the piece emerged as a quote within the overall composition. It had an accessible entrance that the age of electronics has given to all types of music. The dance was choreographed to adapt to changes in density of structure or speed that responded to the different musical structures rather than perceived cultural changes. Carnatic music composition by its nature dictates the ebb and flow of movement. MacDonald's music, by contrast, afforded the dance movement the freedom to breathe and find its own pacing. She has worked with the British choreographer Richard Alston on Delicious Arbour and her own production Romance with Footnotes in 1993, which has received outstanding reviews. In 1995, Shobna Jayasinghe Dance Company (SJDC) and the London Contemporary Dance School (LCDS) conducted an exciting 7-week pilot project to explore the educational and artistic benefits of offering dancers with a variety of training background, expertise and experience complementary training in different techniques. At the same time, there are many individual dancers such as Alpana Sengupta who were playing with the form, seeing what innovations might mean in practice. Others like Pushkala Gopal and Unnikrishnan also began working with Western theatre directors, mostly Hilary, Westlake, etc., on the works like Beauty and the Beast that challenged their own attitudes as traditional classical dancers. Nilima Devi studied Kathak at the MS University of Baroda and post-marriage moved to Germany and from there to Leicester, UK. She founded the Centre for Indian Classical Dance CICD in 1981 with a structured syllabus for a 6-year diploma course in Kathak for a formal qualification. The institute has become an important part of Leicester's pioneering dance provisions under the umbrella of Asian youth dance. In addition to a very busy teaching and performance schedule, Nilima has been concentrating on choreography where she blends the traditional with the contemporary in creative ways. One of her early experiments was choreographing a 7-minute Kathak dance piece on Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 1. In 1989, she choreographed a production of The Ugly Duckling, a dance ballet set to a creative score of Indian music with 50 school children as a support cast. It became so popular that it was reproduced in 1992-93 with a different set of dancers and is likely to be re-choreographed in the future. Her next production was The Triangle, with herself and two senior students as the performers. This work was a melange of small creative pieces threaded together by a common contemporary theme but focused on Indian images. In recent years, she has worked with Kumudini Lakhya, very senior Kathak dancer and teacher from India, who directed the Institute's new production Rainbow, based on the abstract philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. Vena Green Rao is a dancer of Indian origin but born, brought up, and educated in Britain. She studied dance at the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, known as the Institute of Indian Culture, under the Guru Prakash Yadgude. Amongst the youngest of the South Asian performers in UK, she came to India for further training under Dr. Padma Subramaniam. With so many activities afoot, a national organization for South Asian dance called Aditi was established in the Britain in 1991. A pioneering and unusual body, it was set up after lengthy discussions amongst dancers, and its aim was to support them, help their dance forms acquire a higher profile, and generally work towards its integration, but not absorption into the mainstream. It is based in Bradford and run by dancers themselves. In addition to the South Asian dancers of Indian origin promoting the cause of classical Indian dance in the UK, there are also several British choreographers who have collaborated with the South Asian dancers to create wonderful dance pieces whose base is the classical Indian dance. Amongst them are Richard Alston and Chris Bannerman. Alston has worked with Shobana Jayasinghe on delicious arbak set to Purcell's music. Bannerman has participated in a work by Subodh Rathod, choreographed using a combination of Bharatanatyam, Kathak, and contemporary dance. Both men agree that it was a fascinating experience for them to do these works, since it set them thinking about what is dance, what is within the Western dance traditions, what is within the Indian dance traditions, and what does it mean when the two traditions come together. With the advent and quicksilver progression of electronic technology, dance notation combined with video and computer will play an important role in the future. These developments in technology can make dance, especially South Asian dance, much more accessible in Britain than it ever was in the past. It will make the study of movement and gesture, and thereby make the analysis of a particular form much easier. Technology is likely to impact form as well, and the actual act of choreography. When dance is viewed on screen as against on stage or a formal platform, dance appears very different, and modern day choreographers need to keep this reality in mind in their work. Technology is likely to break down the sense of isolation that the dancers and choreographers often feel and get them to develop connections, and it is therefore expected to change a lot of things on how dance is practiced, imagined, conceptualized, and choreographed. So, this is how the Indian, either born or Indian dance trained dancers, have made their real strong mark in the United Kingdom. Like Akram Khan and recently Akash Odedra have done fantastic contemporary works based on Indian classical techniques of Kathak. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.